Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another afternoon Tertulia here at Centro. I'm Yarimar Bonilla, Director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. And our event today is part of our Bridging the Divides series on decolonization. We are very pleased and grateful to have our two guests today, Professor Christina Ponsa Kraus and Representative José Bernardo Márquez, who will be speaking to us about statehood as a decolonizing option for Puerto Rico. Now, I'd like to begin by asking our guests to first offer some introductory remarks about themselves and their background and how they come to this topic. But I do want to recognize that when we announced this event at Centro and on social media especially, we got some pushback because some thought that the question that we had posed, is statehood a decolonizing option for Puerto Rico, had a simple answer. And that might be due perhaps to the dictionary definition of decolonization, which I do want to read from the Oxford English Dictionary. The first definition, very succinct, says the withdrawal of a colonizing state from its colonies, leaving them independent. Now, I will say in our group, we do not stick to this dictionary definition, but there is a second definition there in the Oxford English Dictionary that does speak a little bit more to how we approach it in the group. It says the process of eliminating the effects or influence of colonization or colonialism on the attitudes, assumptions, power structures, institutions, etc., of a formerly colonized people, or later also a former colonial power or culture. So that is a little bit closer to the kind of broad sense of decolonization that we have in the group. But I would love to hear from our guests how they understand decolonization and why, for them, a statehood fits within their definitions of it. So with that, I will turn over the floor. Christina, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you to Yarimar Bonilla for inviting me, and to El Centro for organizing, and to everyone who is here. So my name is Christina Ponsa Kraus. I am Puerto Rican. I was raised on the island from the age of 3 weeks old by my Puerto Rican mother and relocated father, who was from New York and has now been in Puerto Rico for 53 years and considers himself thoroughly Puerto Rican, and is saddened by the resistance to that idea by some who don't see it that way. I grew up there through high school and left for college and have not lived there since. I've just been back a lot, like so many of us, as much as I can. I teach at Columbia Law School. I teach constitutional law and legal history, and I work on the history of American empire, and I write on that topic and on Puerto Rican status, as well as the status of other territories of the United States. I did not know that you had received pushback on this idea. That is the first time I've ever heard anyone say that anything about decolonization was simple. I guess I'll say a few words. Should I say a few words now about decolonization and what I think it is? Okay. So I have found that we Puerto Ricans really have a skill for getting mired in debate. And it's really not our fault. We have been trapped in it. But it would really be heartbreaking if we had an argument about what should happen to Puerto Rico based on a set of definitions or some idea in someone's head about what is and is not decolonization. To my mind, the place to start is to recognize that Puerto Rico is a colony. Often I speak to audiences where I have to give them a beginner's manual on Puerto Rico, but my sense is that this audience is not that. I don't have to explain that Puerto Rico is a colony. To my mind, Puerto Rico ceasing to be a colony is what decolonization is. I too believe that second definition captures it better. So ceasing to be a colony itself is about as complicated an idea as there can be. I think there's colonialism in in law and legal status. I think there's colonialism in life. I think there's colonialism in the mind. And I want to see all forms of decolonization for Puerto Rico. But as a law professor, what I work on professionally is the law, constitutional law in particular. And I think that for Puerto Rico, a condition of the possibility of decolonization broadly defined is legal decolonization. That is the end of legal forms of subordination to which Puerto Rico has been subjected since its annexation and frankly, since many years before. And so I consider statehood a form of decolonization for Puerto Rico just as much as independence and just as much as that status known as free association, which has been the source of so much debate, and I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A if it comes up, because statehood would bring Puerto Rico formal legal equality and representation in the polity that Puerto Rico would form a part of it if it became a state. So decolonization in the legal sense is equality and representation. Those things, when they come by law, they don't decolonize the mind. But without them, I don't think you can decolonize the mind. So I consider them essential conditions, and I think that statehood can bring them in one form, and independence can bring them in another. And free association, we can talk about.
Well, before moving to get Representative Marquez's thoughts, I do want to ask you, so why statehood versus independence? Why is statehood a better mode of decolonizing, especially if that legal decolonization is not going to guarantee other forms of decolonization?
Sure. So I frankly don't think any form of legal decolonization is going to fully decolonize Puerto Rico. I mean, we've been a colony for our entire existence. I think to decolonize our collective existence is going to take more than just that transition, even if the transition is to independence. We're still going to be a tiny little island next to the United States. We're still going to be awash in American influence. And it's going to take a lot more than that. But I'm happy to speak to why I favor statehood, although I want to preface that answer by saying that I think that there are at least two, many more, but really at least two basic conversations to be had about status. One among Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico who have the right to choose their future and who should be given an opportunity to exercise that right and choose among their decolonizing options. The other conversation is among people outside of Puerto Rico, mainly those of us who live stateside, reality being what it is. Puerto Ricans living stateside will care more, though in my view, all Americans should care about decolonizing Puerto Rico. And I am always glad to promote and defend statehood, and I have done so in writing and in speaking, and yet it's actually not what I usually do. And the reason I don't usually do it is that I think that it's up to Puerto Ricans living in Puerto Rico to choose their future. And I think our job as Puerto Ricans living stateside is to insist and demand and not give up until the United States offers Puerto Ricans an opportunity to make that choice. And the stance that we ought to have with respect to Puerto Rico is that they are welcome to join, welcome to leave. It's their choice to make. But I want to emphasize, welcome to join or welcome to leave. I think living stateside, being Puerto Ricans living in a state, having our own voting rights and our own equality and our own representatives and our own power that they lack, I think it's offensive to insist that Puerto Rico not have the option to join.
But the question I asked was, why is statehood a better form of decolonization than independence?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to, I want to lay the groundwork for my answer by insisting that I'm happy to answer it, but from my perspective, Puerto Rican stateside, the message I want to send is Puerto Rico is welcome to join and welcome to leave. As for what my personal preference, why do I prefer statehood? Why would I vote for statehood?
Why should anyone consider if we are welcome to choose? Why should we choose that one? Because I think sure. That's what for our group. What we're most invested in is what is the best choice for Puerto Ricans, not what does the U.S. owe us, whatever, but what should we demand? What should we want? What should we seek?
Sure. So, if I were in Puerto Rico, or what I would argue to my fellow Puerto Ricans living on the island making this choice, is the following. Statehood, I think, is the most empowering choice for Puerto Rico. So as I said before, Puerto Rico will always be a little island stuck next to an enormous power. Puerto Ricans have US citizenship and by all indications want to remain US citizens. As long as Puerto Rico is, so we can talk about what happens if Puerto Ricans aren't US citizens, but as long as Puerto Ricans are US citizens and want to be US citizens, which when I say by all, available evidence, I mean, over 90% of Puerto Ricans have favored keeping their statehood by all available measures for, 70 years, if not more. So once we have that circumstance, US citizens living on an island, a small island next to the United States, subject to US sovereignty for 125 years adds to it, okay? The best, most effective way to empower Puerto Ricans to be well economically, to be well in terms of their quality of life, to be well in terms of their ability to be where they want to be, go where they want to go, live how they want to live, is to have voting representation in the federal government. So I'm not a nationalist. I'm not an American nationalist. I'm not a Puerto Rican nationalist. I think equality and representation are moral imperatives. I don't think nationhood is a moral imperative. And so when I look at Puerto Rico's history and what its people desire for themselves, which is, as far as I can understand, citizenship, don't want to lose that, then my view is, well, what we want then is the equality of citizenship that is a condition of decolonization. And if you're going to be US citizens, well, then you ought to have the vote. You ought to have the vote for the president. You ought to have your 2 senators. You ought to have your representatives. So for me, the argument for statehood is really a voting rights argument. It's the same argument I would make to any one state side why you should go to the polls. That's the argument that I would make for statehood.
Okay.
So it's not going to be like a rah-rah, United States. Not my feeling, not where I'm coming from. It's really, how do we empower ourselves?
Okay. I have lots of follow-up questions, but I'm mindful of the time. I want to make sure we get Jose in here as well. Jose, can you give us your thoughts on why you think statehood is a decolonizing option, and why do you think it's the best option? Like, I still haven't heard. What I hear from Christina is if we are invested in U.S. citizenship, then statehood is the best option. But I'm not sure if then that's the only thing has going for it. Jose, what do you think? And I'm sorry, and a little background that you might want to offer about yourself and how you come to this question.
Yes. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I want to make sure that you guys hear me okay.
Yes.
You do? Okay. Well, I have prepared some comments, some initial comments. So I would like to make that introduction and then answer to the question that Professor Bonilla is making, in my regards to Professor Ponsa, who I've read since I was in undergrad. So I am a representative in the Puerto Rico House of Representatives. I belong to the Citizens Victory Movement, which is a recent political movement in Puerto Rico that precisely on the topic of Puerto Rico's status tries to develop a different approach than has been historically Puerto Rico's political parties that have been divided by the question of the status. So we have tried to organize ourselves around political, economic, and social issues and respect our differences regarding Puerto Rico's status, but support a decolonizing process. So I belong to a party where we have people who believe in independence, in free association, and myself as a stakeholder. Regarding the topic of this tertulia, the initial comments I wanted to make was first 3 comments about the question that is being posed, and then try to answer the question. So I first received a few weeks ago an invitation to discuss statehood as a decolonizing option. When you see, and I was aware of the debate that was created mainly on Twitter about the event, the promo added a question mark. Is statehood a decolonizing option? And so I must say that I find it quite unbelievable to have to justify not my preference for statehood, but its basic legitimacy as a decolonizing option. I'll try to be disciplined and answer the question, but first we'll make 3 short comments about the question. I think that the question is a theoretical artifice. It's, instead of asking perhaps why statehood has risen as an option, the pros or cons of statehood, the possibilities or limitations of statehood, it suggests that maybe statehood should be out of the table in the first place. It seems like wanting to win a game or a battle, not by playing or fighting, but by disqualifying the opposition. Which leads me to the second comment. The question, I think it's politically futile. After 125 years of American colonialism in Puerto Rico, where statehood has been considered a decolonizing option since the first day and has been growing more and more in recent decades, does anyone believe that any decolonizing process will move a needle without statehood as an option, when statehood is recognized as a decolonizing option both in the United Nations, in the United States, and even by all current political parties in Puerto Rico? Even the Partido Independentista includes statehood as an option of the decolonizing process they propose. But perhaps some will say or argue that the role of an intellectual space like this is to go beyond realpolitik and think things through without perhaps the practical considerations of politicians as myself. Which leads me to the third comment, and I think that the question seems to be strictly and conveniently directed at statehood. Perhaps in the future events, there's going to be questions about free association, which is going to be my argument. And so I asked if our train of thought is to not be so simplistic as some will argue public discussion about Puerto Rico's status has been, then we must go all the way. We have to interrogate the decolonizing potential of other status preferences and not just statehood. We have to ask about the limits of independence or free association to try to decolonize.
And let me, this is one of multiple events that we're going to have, but we precisely wanted to avoid the crossfire, 3 different debates. We want to go beyond the usual talking points and go deep. And I think when we put the question mark too, it's like, well, what does this mean? What would it look like? I think, and I should say, the statehood movement didn't always use the language of decolonization. So I think we have to note that too. Romero Barceló famously said that the Puerto Rico and U.S.'s relationship was a domestic one, and that it shouldn't be, discussed at the level of the UN. That that this was something to talk about internally. So it's only until recent decades that the statehood movement has been using the language of decolonization. So I think it's fair that there's still a lot of question marks around what that means, and that's what we want to. I don't want to eat up the time with that, but so let's get into it. So how would statehood decolonize? And what I really would like to hear from both of you is okay, the UN accepts this as an option. I think most people who are specialists in this area agree that legally it is an option and should be on ballots. I would also agree that this is not a minority in Puerto Rico that want this, but what we need to talk about is why. What would it mean? Why would it be in our best interest? Why is it the best form of decolonization? That's what I would love to hear.
Yeah. Well, my answer to the question is, I would say, mainly political. It's about fixing political dependency through basic democratic legitimacy and meaningful representation, as many have written. So I think it's about having the ability to make the decisions that our daily lives, and that comes with representation and the ability to vote for the leaders that make a lot of decisions. In this case, in our case, for decades, federal law, federal programs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it is decolonizing in the political sense. And I think we can make interesting questions, as I was saying before, about other kinds of like economic or cultural or social questions that come with the different options. But I think the center of discussion in political history in Puerto Rico has been to resolve the political question. And that's why I think statehood is a decolonization option. Why do I favor statehood? I favor statehood because I think it's first the one of the most practical ways to finally resolve this issue, and I also view it as strengthening our ties to progressive movements in the United States, because I consider myself a progressive, and I want to fight climate change, and I want to reduce guns, and I want to fight for better conditions for Puerto Ricans living in the mainland. And I think by strengthening our ties to progressive movements in the states through statehood, I think we can fight for better policies, not just that fix or put Puerto Ricans in better economic and social conditions, but also promote social justice and beginning in the influence of the United States across the world.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it echoes, a platform that, stipulated for some time about progressive statehood, radical statehood, leftist statehood. So, there have been previous instances of calls for statehood as a way of Puerto Ricans being in solidarity with African Americans, with minorities in the US, et cetera. But I have to ask, given what we know about, the disappointments of the civil rights movement, for example, and the limits of legal equality, right? And I should, emphasize that I'm also coming into this conversation as a scholar of the French Caribbean, of Guadeloupe and Martinique, that became fully incorporated into France as départements, the equivalent of a state, where they have all that kind of legal equality, and yet they have persisting inequality in terms of economics, the cultural, they feel like culturally like they're still in a colonial relationship to France, and that they can't really impact the politics of France with their, tiny representation in the assembly. So given all those limits to legal equality, why do you think that statehood would be still better for us, even in that progressive agenda, than being an independent nation in solidarity with progressive movements in the US?
Well, I don't think it would be automatic. I think we're gonna have the ability to choose the political figures and to participate in the political movements that can help us achieve not just legal equality, but real equality. But while we stay as a colony with no representation and meaningful participation, then none of that, not even the legal equality, can be achieved. So I do recognize the limits of an automatic, incorporation of Puerto Rico into the United States. It's not going to come easy, and we can see that in the history of all of those social movements that you were mentioning. But I think it's part of being in a political community, and it's not. I don't think we should see the United States as a static society. We should see ourselves as participating in that struggle and trying to move that struggle forward.
So I'll jump in and say, I agree with absolutely everything the representative has said. I also don't really I don't agree with I guess the framing of that last question, given the experience of other small former colonies, having difficulty influencing, national politics, like, why should we believe that this is a road to decolonization? To me, that's like arguing, that my vote doesn't really make a difference because after all, this, that, and the other structural impediment. So screw it, I won't vote. I just think we need to step up and take our equality and take our power and take our representation. And whether that's going to be statehood or independence, that ought to be our attitude. I mean, we just really just sink ourselves by arguing all that, they're not going to give us statehood. They'll never let us go into independence. They'll never this, they'll never that, The answer is demand what you deserve. And the fact that Puerto Rico is, small and won't ever be, in the driver's seat on US policy. True, not as a state, not as an independent country, but having equality and representation and your voice and being heard and having formal equality, I think will make just a transformative difference in how people experience their political life. And I think that's true of statehood or independence. So I know that in this event, you want us to kind of make this the case for statehood. But I think statehood has its pros and cons, and independence has its pros and cons. And, we keep bracketing free association. We want to talk about it or not, I don't know. But statehood and all forms of independence have their pros and cons. There is definitely, downsides to statehood, and there's definitely downsides to independence. Okay, but I like to all of them. I think the answer needs to be what we have now is beyond unacceptable. We're a colony officially, we're a colony legally, we're a colony formally. We need a way out, and the way out is equality and representation, whether we're in or we're out. And then we can talk about what do we do about the fact that Puerto Ricans not only don't want to lose their U.S. citizenship, don't want to lose the ability to go back and forth between the U.S. and Puerto Rico, right? Independence is about closing that border. Or let's just say this, right? Because of course the independent, they want citizenship, they want to be able to go back and forth between the United States, but they want independence. I would like to see a panel, somebody explaining how that makes any sense.
Yeah,
but
we're going to have a panel on each of them.
I'm excited about that.
And we will be discussing pros and cons and critiques of absolutely each of them.
Okay, I just want to wrap up that point by saying that I think it's critical to, I think any question, this one very much so, needs to be answered in context with a view to and a mind toward the history of the place we're talking about, the people's expressed desires, and the consequences on the ground. And so it has to be answered relative to the overwhelming desire for citizenship and the implications for the back and forth, movement between Puerto Rico and the United States, as much as it should be answered with reference to, Guadeloupe has a hard time influencing French policy. I don't think Guadeloupe will ever have an easy time influencing French policy, So yeah, anyway. So
and there's also the question of the incomplete civil rights movement, right? And I have two follow-up questions here. Christina, you've said that you're not necessarily pro-American, that you just want equality and parity, that you're not invested in nationalism, but isn't there some level of appreciation for the United States, some kind of American patriotism? Isn't that required for a claim to be part of this nation? And I have to say, I often talk, I was doing ethnographic research among statehood supporters in Puerto Rico, and I would often hear, the desire for statehood framed in very pragmatic and practical terms. And they would tell me that independence was romantic and illusorio, right? But is that the kind of relationship that we want to have to our nation, a kind of transactional one? Does the effective feeling of belonging to a nation or not matter in this equation?
So to be clear, I don't want the takeaway to be that I'm somehow anti-American. So when I say this is not about nationalism, what I mean by that is that my argument for statehood is not a romantic one in the sense that I believe that somehow the project of US nationalism is somehow preferable to the project of Puerto Rican nationalism. That's not me. I am not sympathetic to, or I don't sort of partake of the romantic nationalist feeling that people who see themselves as patriotic experience. So this is me. I don't know how interesting this is to your audience, but I am a vocal Puerto Rican, love my island and talk about it, love my island so deeply it hurts. And I've dedicated a lot of my professional life to talking about it and to trying to do my part for decolonization. But am I pro Puerto Rican? Or it's just not a thing with me. I think nationalism has mostly been a force for bad. I think the purpose of nationalism or national boundaries is to, create a territory with respect to which a government has the duty to ensure civil rights, human rights, and a good life. That's what national boundaries are for. And so I don't have this. For me, it isn't about seeing 51 flags, 51 stars are on the American flag. Is it merely pragmatic? No, I wouldn't want Puerto Rico to become a full part of a country whose policies I object to. Actually, I object to plenty of US policies too, but what I mean is whose sort of vision of the good life I don't believe in. But it's not, for me, it really is, about empowerment. And to me, that's an ideal. It's about inclusion and empowerment. And inclusion, I don't think has to mean erasure. And I think we Puerto Ricans have an opportunity to prove that. It's about inclusion and erasure. Or to put it, I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up because I know I'm being long-winded. But I work on constitutional history. I've written a lot about Puerto Rico's annexation in 1898. I have no illusions about the way the United States has treated racial minorities, ethnic minorities, national minorities. This is what I write about. I write about this openly racist moment in US history where they annex Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Guam. And then they say, these people aren't white, so there's no way they can govern themselves. And there's no way we're letting them in. Okay. And my view is I would like to refute that argument. I would like not to be, if it's, we're too different to be fully empowered within the American experiment, then the imperialists win. Okay. Now, if we want to leave, I don't think anybody should stop us, but everybody wants to be a US citizen. Well, then show them wrong. So, so it's a long answer because it's hard for me to articulate. It's not, for me, it's not just like economics, Puerto Rico will get benefits and we're done. But it's also not about rah-rah, like in either direction.
Yeah. But should our decolonization be based on proving them wrong or in finding what we want? I mean,
well, to be clear, I'm not saying
the same thing as liberation.
It should not solely be based, like nothing I'm saying here is the only thing I'm saying. So I would certainly not say that decolonization should be, in order to prove the United States wrong. That's one sentiment I have when I read these materials, when I read these statements from politicians and states, US politicians and statesmen, around the turn of the century, saying these people are just, our democratic experiment does not accommodate these people. I mean, it's not like it comes as a shock. This is a period of time. This is Jim Crow, right? Black people were not allowed to vote either.
Is it any different now? I mean, and that was a question I had, and I'm gonna put it on the table. I'm not gonna wait for it, but in this moment when the U.S. is more divided than ever, where there's secessionist movement, where there was like whatever January 6th was, an attempt to divide the United States. Like, is this the nation, the democratic experiment that Puerto Ricans want to be a part of? Or should we try to have our own democratic experiment? José, get in here. What do you think?
Well, I think that obviously there are different versions of the United States depending on which political party, which political movement you ask. And I don't want to be part of a United States that it's governed or decided by a nationalist American movement. So, but if I assume that is the only United States possible, I think that is not just terrible for Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, but for a lot of people in the mainland, including Puerto Ricans. So that's why I say that I think statehood strengthens our ties to progressive movements and to this other version of the United States constitutional political project that I think is worth being a part of. So that's what I would say.
Christina, any other thoughts on this, or you?
Sure. So once again, I agree with what the representative said. I do think that the United States, over the past, basically since Trump, the Trump era, has become significantly more, unappealing and concerning as a democracy. Its hypocrisy has been, just brought to the fore. It's the racist attitudes that one thought we were making some progress away from, alive and well, and endorsed by, starting with a president on down. All of that is concerning, to be sure. To me, that is not an argument for any civil rights movement to give up. Okay, so I think when you talk about the unfinished civil rights movement, I'm completely on board with you. It's unfinished, and one way in which it's unfinished is that Puerto Rico is still a colony. And so my response to what I see happening in the United States isn't let's give up, let's go somewhere else. So I realize Puerto Rico has the option to leave in a way that domestic civil rights movements don't quite the same, despite all the talk of secessionism. It's not the same thing. Yeah. And yet I do see Puerto Rico, we're here. What we are is subordinate. And I don't think that the ways in which the US democracy has gone even worse should be an argument against empowerment for Puerto Ricans. I think that we should keep fighting for equality. We should keep fighting for representation. And then we should keep fighting to improve this democracy and make it more equitable for all.
Yeah. Well, let me bring in some of the questions that have been placed in the Q&A box from our audience, and they overlap with questions that I wanted to ask. So first, a lot of people asking about Hawaii. So, Hawaii is often mentioned as an ideal that Puerto Ricans should aspire to and celebrated as, an example of all the economic prosperity that statehood would bring. But, Centro's data have, dug into the numbers, and, I don't think anyone will be surprised. There's stark racial and ethnic differences in Hawaii, with Native Hawaiians experiencing much higher levels of poverty, lower levels of educational attainment, economic attainment. Puerto Rico already has incredible economic disparity, some of the highest in the world. How can we ensure that statehood does not exasperate those economic divides and just lead to further migration and displacement through, by an increase in the cost of living and the displacement of local Puerto Ricans?
So I'm not even familiar with the actual evidence that statehood would increase those disparities. I think those disparities are a serious problem, and I am not a person who argues we should be a state because look at Hawaii. I do think statehood would bring economic betterment to Puerto Rico, but I think the Hawaii example usually comes up because of the effects of statehood on the native population, which is not good. So in my view, the effects of annexation, that was the problem for the native population. So to me, it's not that statehood is worse for the native population. In fact, on the contrary, I think if anything, it increases their voice too. But does it actually bring parity and equality to native populations? No. Is American statehood good for indigenous populations? No. Is independence better for Puerto Rico's native population? Do I think independence will somehow diminish those inequalities? I haven't seen that evidence either. But I think that the status of indigenous peoples is its own problem that would have to be addressed, whether Puerto Rico became a state or became independent. And I've not seen any evidence that somehow statehood would exacerbate the problem. And if could help.
The first event we had in this series was with the economist José Caraballo Cueto, And what he said was that basically no status options guarantee economic prosperity, including statehood, that any of them, could go any way. And in terms of statehood, statehood would not eliminate our debt. It would not repeal the Jones Act. It would not ensure an increased standard of living. It wouldn't ensure anything. And yet a lot of statehood politicians say literally my economic plan is statehood. Like they suggest that statehood will be a magic wand that will bring economic prosperity. And Christina, you seem to suggest that you have a firm belief that it will be more economically advantageous. So why do you believe that?
So I have a lot of respect for José Caraballo Cueto, and I wasn't at that event, so I haven't read what he's written on this for that event. Historically, statehood has always meant economic development. So it's that history and those studies that I'm referring to. But I also want to say, I don't think any status option guarantees anything other than what it can guarantee. I am not an advocate of arguments that this status option or that status option will solve every problem on earth. And I do think that any status option comes with economic uncertainty because the economy is uncertain. There's so many things that go into it. But historically, statehood has come with an economic boost. And I think integration into a successful economy, economists have shown that is a beneficial economic result. So I agree that no status option guarantees it, but I think that the likelihood that statehood brings with it economic development, and I'm not an economist myself, but I have seen studies on the effects of integration, and they just make common sense. So to me, I think that the chances are good that statehood would be good for Puerto Rico's economy, and I think there's greater uncertainty with other options, but I don't think, statehood, presto, our economic problems are over at all.
Jose?
So, I wanted to comment first. Statehood gives us participation in the making of those economic policies, which we don't have right now. And second, I haven't read the most recent work of Professor Caraballo Cueto, but I did read the statements he made in Congress, I think last year. And what he said, or what I remember him saying, is that statehood, as other options, will bring tools in some areas and challenges in other areas, but there's no fixed model that we can anticipate. And so what I remember him also writing some years ago was that statehood would bring an improvement in the health sector and in redistributive policies in Puerto Rico, and will also challenge certain economic and corporations because of the taxes. But he's recognizing we're going to have these challenges and we're going to have these opportunities in the balance. It'd probably be better than the current status. He has said that regarding statehood, and he has said that regarding independence. So I don't buy into the notion that it's going to be magical, but I don't buy also into the notion that it's going to be worse than currently. So I think, again, it's going to be a political and an economic project we're going to be able to be a part of, both from economic policy at the federal level and at the state level.
Yes. I have to say, I appreciate so much this level of conversation, because I feel like this is not what we usually hear. We usually hear from politicians, of course, that statehood is this magic wand, and so that's why we wanted to really break this down. So from what in our study group, what we've seen so far, it seems like there are no economic guarantees, and Christina, I would love to, if you could share with our group the studies that have influenced your thinking, and we will do the same, because what we have found is that, it's not everyone that has benefited financially from statehood. You can see very sharp divides for who it is beneficial for. So we don't think that economically it's an easy answer, like, yes, it will be absolutely more beneficial. We also don't think that politically it will be absolutely more beneficial, because looking at comparative cases in the US, for full citizenship, And in other forms of decolonization through integration, that has not been the case either, right? And so we want to clear out those kind of facile and in some ways misleading affirmations that some politicians on the campaign trail, and in plebiscite campaigns, sometimes these talking points don't serve us in really understanding our options. And so I want to move to another, I think this will be perhaps the final question that we take, or maybe you have a chance for one more from the audience, which is about process, right? And it involves also like the role of the political parties in this process, because I don't think anyone would say that the plebiscites that we have had and the way they're conducted and everything that surrounds them has served us, as a people, as a transnational community. So a couple of questions around that. First, some people think that we need a constitutional assembly before a binding referendum. Others think we're ready to go straight into a statehood admissions bill. So can each of you explain the processes you think are necessary, the educational campaigns that you think are necessary, and who needs to be involved with those? And there's the issue of the plebiscites that show a support for statehood, but those have been very contested. The U.S. government itself does not recognize them as valid. The ones that have like a supposed supermajority have a very low turnout rate. To what extent does such an important question require kind of different democratic processes that we can have faith in? Whoever wants to jump in.
I can go first. I think that, the party I belong to, we support the Status Convention, but we suppose the Status Convention because of the inaction of the United States government. So we view it as a way of pushing and trying to communicate that Puerto Rico is determined to decolonize and is demanding that the United States acts. If the United States, as happened recently, is willing to advance a decolonization process, and it's willing to offer its point of view regarding the Puerto Rico status right now, then I think we should participate in that process. So what we have argued, and I believe in as a political activist, is that we should not be organized politically in Puerto Rico around the status preference, because going to Congress and going to the United States divided has been the perfect excuse for the United States government to do nothing, because they say that Puerto Rico should agree or should demand a more clear options of preference before they act. So I think we should try to get together, find common ground around the process, and then push the United States to act. And I think that the recent efforts in Congress were positive. And I think the best example is the collaborations that Professor Ponsa had with someone like Professor Coxalomar. They are on different sides of the topic. They supported initially different projects, but they were trying to look for a consensus bill. And I think it was a good bill that was, advanced significantly if we look at recent history in the United States about these topics. So I think those are the kind of processes and efforts that I want to be a part of, because sadly, not acting on this topic does not mean that we are stuck. It means that we are going backwards, actually. If you look at the implications of the fiscal board and Promesa and the limits of our powers, my powers as a legislator in Puerto Rico, we recently, last year, approved the labor reform, and it was recently declared null and void by the federal court of Promesa. So every minute that we do not invest in trying to agree and find common ground and bridging the divides on this topic. It's minutes that we are retreating in a sense of our powers to decide our future.
So, well, this time I agree with almost everything the representative said. The one thing I don't agree with is that Puerto Rico should have a constitutional convention. And to be clear here, Puerto Rico has a right to have a constitutional convention if it wants to. Nobody can stop it. However, I think that the fatal flaw with the efforts that Puerto Rico has made to get movement from the United States on all of this is that the United States hasn't been behind the efforts that Puerto Rico has made. So 5 plebiscites between 1967 and 2017, and then the referendum in 2020, over and over and over and over, we've made an effort to push the United States into acting. And Puerto Rico can't decolonize without the United States acting because we're a colony of the United States. That really is a reality that's inescapable. And so to my mind, our having a constitutional convention is grueling. It's exhausting. It is real effort that Congress would then be perfectly entitled to ignore and frankly, perfectly likely to ignore. I don't think the fact that we put in an effort moves them at all. And so that's why I was pushing this compromise bill with Professor Cox-Salomar. As the representative said, Rafael Cox-Salomar and I started on opposite sides, testifying on in favor of opposing bills before the committee with oversight over Puerto Rico. And we just decided that, here we are again. After those hearings, we talked to each other and we said, this just pitted us against each other and we have so much common ground. And really neither of us thought that the bills that we were testifying in support of were the best way forward. We spoke honestly about our support for those bills. But what Puerto Ricans need, as the representative said, is consensus on a process in order to move Congress. And so the bill we pushed, our emphasis in that compromise bill was that it's Congress's responsibility to offer Puerto Ricans the decolonizing options that are available. That's Congress's responsibility. That to us is not putting Congress in charge, letting Congress, run the show. It's making Congress commit to offer Puerto Rico options and to implement them when Puerto Ricans choose them. And nothing stops Puerto Ricans then from debating the options on the merits. The bill that we were pushing, which did pass in the House, provided for a federally funded education campaign. That is absolutely critical. People need to understand what they're going to the polls to vote on. But my view is enough letting the United States off the hook. And we pour our heart and our soul and our sweat and our tears into this battle with each other, and then they just ignore us. It's all, whatever, So that's, I think that it's imperative that we come together and insist that Congress enact legislation providing for a process. And I believe that process should be give Puerto Rico its options. Then Puerto Ricans can debate them knowing that what they choose will be implemented. And then the voting can proceed.
Well, I have a lot of so many more questions, but let me just do a little lightning round to end. Just yes or no, okay? So should the diaspora have a vote in a decolonizing plebiscite? Yes or no?
No. You really just want to know?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Jose?
I would say I'm not close to the idea, but I think, how do you define that and how do you decide who participates? It's pretty hard.
It's tricky.
Hard for me to answer that question.
Should we just say no, or should we figure out? Should we say yes, but we need to figure that out?
Actually, I want to amend because we already have a vote because it's Congress that's going to pass this legislation. So giving the diaspora a vote then on the choice that Puerto Rico makes, the diaspora gets a double vote. It's Puerto Ricans who live with this choice. So so no on the process in the vote in Puerto Rico, but frankly, they've got their vote.
Okay. Yes or no? Should
I'm
recent
open
transplant?
I'm open to the idea. It's hard to say yes or no. I mean, I'm open to the idea. If I
Okay.
see a specific proposal, I could,
Okay. I should say
decide.
yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Like, we're just looking for succinct answers, but it doesn't have to be yes or no. So what about the recent transplants from the 50 states who benefit from tax exemptions in Puerto Rico, that tax exemptions that might disappear, one assumes, under statehood? Should they have a vote in a decolonizing plebiscite? Yes or no?
Do who have? I don't understand the question. Who?
Folks who benefit from Act 2022, Act 60, who don't pay income taxes in Puerto Rico.
I think.
I mean, if they.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. If they live in Puerto Rico, I think people who live in Puerto Rico could vote and participate in any kind of process. I mean, probably these laws, are going to be changed in any of the status that would prevail under a decolonizing process. But I think people who live in Puerto Rico are going to be able to vote in elections if they comply with the voting requisites of Puerto Rican law.
Okay, Christina?
I agree completely. I think it ought to be up to Puerto Rico to decide who is a qualified registered voter in Puerto Rico. And if Puerto Rico decides that they are qualified registered voters, then they could vote.
Should residents of the 50 states have a say on whether their nation should grow?
Well, they have a say with the representatives and senators and president that sign bills into law.
There's also a very long history of it. So as I think people know, right, it's constitutionally provided that Congress decides if and when to admit states. So I think that Puerto Rico has to have a say because we're no longer in the world in which the empire decides what to do. But I think that, Americans, per their constitution, Congress has the power to admit or refrain from admitting. And so they have a say. They've always had a say. And sure, they should have a say in that sense. And they will have a say if Congress offers the options, then through their representatives, they are having a say.
Okay. Well, we're gonna move to a different Zoom, but I want to thank everyone who joined the webinar. I wasn't able to look at all the chat, but I'll look at it later. I saw people asking for, how can they stay in touch about these series. Everything will be posted on our YouTube site, and you can always find all our events as they're coming together on our social media and Centro PR website. So thank you so much for joining us in this tertulia, and we will continue the conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.